we want to invite you to the Intentional Motherhood Retreat 2024. Last year, over 600 mothers gathered together to learn, to worship, both to encourage and to be encouraged. The Father spoke and the Spirit moved and Jesus healed. And it was so incredible that we cannot wait to do it again. We want to invite you October 3rd through 5th here in Bend, Oregon, where we live. We know that the journey of motherhood is both beautiful and it is hard. It is both life-giving and exhausting at times. And we just want to create space for the Spirit to refresh you in your journey. We're going to lean into how motherhood so gently and beautifully leads us in the way of spiritual formation. We're going to talk about how we need each other on the journey. We're going to talk about how our connection with God ultimately impacts the connection that we have with our kids. This retreat is both for mothers who desire to be mothers someday, all the way to grandmothers, and anywhere in between, because the truth is we all need each other. We need to learn from each other, and we need to be together. It was Dallas Willard who said, if you don't come apart for a while, you will come apart in a while. And that is especially true for us mothers. So we just invite you to come away with us. Let's see what the Spirit wants to do, and we can't wait to see you.
You're listening to the Intentional Parents Podcast, brought to you by Intentional. Intentional is all about spiritual formation in the family. We desire to bring biblical hope and practical help. Enjoy this week's conversation.
This episode is brought to you by Walgreens Gel Pack.
Welcome to the Intentional Parents Podcast. Phil, why is this episode brought to us by Walgreens Gel Pads?
Because Diane has an ice pack on her knee because she had surgery yesterday for a torn meniscus.
So before we get into that, because we need to hear what's happening, because this is a real family update. I mean, it's a big deal. We did want to say thank you to everybody who has rated and subscribed. And if you haven't had a moment, could you just pause for 10 seconds if you're on Apple Podcasts or Spotify or whatever you like to listen on, just rate and subscribe. And then if you are listening to this, we're on YouTube now. You can click the link in the show notes on whatever you're listening, and you can actually subscribe there. And now a like and a subscribe on YouTube, I don't know why, but it helps us so much. It helps people actually know that we have a channel. So if you haven't subscribed, feel free to do that. If you like the content, feel free to give it a thumbs up. But we are here today. We're going to jump into a fun episode on capacity. So starting with the fact that Diane just had a little bit of a very minor surgery yesterday, but at the same time, it's affected your capacity. So give us a heads up of how you're doing and kind of what happened.
Okay. Well, I tore a meniscus.
Yeah.
Pretty common injury. And then, but because I wear a cochlear implant, it got really complicated to get an MRI that is needed for it. So took a little while. But yesterday, well, basically I could have not done the surgery. The doctor said, kind of was like, oh, it's definitely something, but you could probably get away without doing it. But then when I told him I want to be hiking on my 80th birthday, he said, have the surgery.
Got
That's
it.
right.
Yeah.
So
not in a lot of pain, just...
So we're not endorsed by Walgreens by any means, but
no, just the ice pack
just
is
the gel
there.
pad
I had to go
here.
two places to find an ice pack
Yes.
that you can freeze in the freezer.
However, I do not feel completely clear-headed.
No.
I know. I when you said that before we started recording, I was actually excited. I said this could be really fun. So we could see what happens today. We might have some fun one-liners from Diane.
This may have to be edited.
I don't know. I like the raw format as well. You gals just got back from Texas. I was just in LA for a little bit. Wonderful church, Everwell Church. What a great church. And Josh and Shay lead that church. They're great people. I can't wait I got to meet everybody and that whole community, their whole community that I met that listens to the podcast.
Fun.
So if that community is listening, so good to meet you all. And then you guys got to meet some folks. You went to the IF gathering, ladies, and you met some really fun people that tune in as well. And overall, a fun experience from what I heard. Any highlights or any things that you're...
What was the highlight? I think for both of us, it was 14,000 people? 13,000 women there. I mean, huge in this huge arena.
Sure.
We actually ran into 5 or 6 people who we knew at the venue, which was
That's
just
so
crazy.
fun.
Plus, we went with a group of 5 of us. So 5 women.
Well,
went
women
to the
that
house
people know on that,
together.
like it was Greta and Sally, and
Yes.
you, and then Sally's daughter. You guys
Yeah.
all went. What a
Yes.
party! I'm all
So
happy
fun.
you're-
And I don't think I've ever done any sort of trip like that. Like just go to a conference with other women.
and not
I
speak.
don't do
at
girls
it.
trips apparently.
Yeah, yeah.
But it was so refreshing on such a like soul level.
Yes.
And If Gathering was incredible.
Yeah.
Just
Yeah.
rich content.
Yeah.
And yeah, it was so
If you're not familiar with that ministry, it's led by Jenny Allen, and it's just very much a lot of what we talk about, and
Yeah.
very strong in the scriptures. In fact, one of my favorites was pretty much all the speakers, instead of doing the digital Bible, they encouraged all of us to open our actual
Yeah.
Bibles.
yeah.
And I loved that. The whole thing was just so
Yeah.
encouraging.
which
such a good deal.
got us so excited for the next motherhood retreat.
Yes.
I was like
Yes.
taking notes constantly,
Uh-huh.
just ideas,
Taking
and-
pictures.
yeah. So
Come out. Yeah, you've heard the announcement
Yes.
already, but October 3rd through 5th, come out. It's going to be
Yeah.
a great time.
And bring friends. It's
Yes.
so much more fun to go to something like that with a group of women.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, some incredible brave souls came last year. All
I
by
just
themselves,
loved that though.
across
They also
the country.
that was
One with a
great.
nursing baby by
Yeah.
herself, all the way across the country.
Incredible.
Figured it all out. But next time, bring
Yeah.
5 people with you.
Come.
Yeah.
Because that really, for us, for the IF conference, it really increased our capacity
Yes.
to absorb the material, because we
Yeah.
were talking afterwards.
Yeah.
For hours.
You're right. That's
Yeah.
part of the processing. Yeah.
Yeah.
So capacity. Let's talk about that. I think this age and stage specifically. I'll say our age and stage as far as having kids. I think everybody, but especially when you have kids that are growing up in your home still. We have a lot of capacity issues, feeling like we don't have enough of it, feeling like we really are at the end of our rope is another way to say that. But we kind of want to talk about that difference between capacity, capability, really what is God's heart for us with that. And so I just want to begin the conversation with talking about capacity. And even like today, your physical capacity is limited, right? You're not going to go run a half marathon like
I'm
you
not
said.
dashing about the house, making sure every coffee cup is put in the dishwasher, which Phil probably loves.
Yeah.
It's a lot more relaxed around here today.
She can
But
only
she
go
is
from
texting
space.
me from the other room. Can you please bring me this? Can you go do this? It's like,
It's good for us to have to serve. It's a good thing, but nonetheless, capacity. And so, I just want to start with that topic today, capacity. And one of the things that we also want to recognize is that there's a certain level of being stretched beyond our capacity. We were talking about this a little before, but let's talk about that for a moment. Like there are moments when being stretched beyond our capacity, or we don't have capacity for a certain thing, but yet we are still in the thing. Right. I think about our situation with Birdie and when she got really sick, like, we didn't feel like we had capacity for it, and we really did not have capacity for it. At the same time, there was something about stepping into a space that we had to depend upon God so thoroughly and entirely that actually has been a gift for us in the long run, although we felt like we were going to die in the short run. So what are your thoughts?
Well, I feel like first it would be important to talk about the difference between capacity and ability, like capability. I
So
think
is this like you saying, here's my room for improvement of how you started that? Let me just say, let's go back. Like you started that wrong. Let me go back and tell you actually how we should start.
We have a
this.
couple of definitions.
I think that what you were
I think you're right.
starting to say is
Yes.
such an important part
I was
of this
trying not to be the only one
conversation.
talking is what I was trying to do. So contribute anybody, please feel free to say
Okay,
anything
what
else.
listeners don't know is that pre having cameras filming us, we would do lots of like hand signals, like I've got something to say, or no, don't say that yet. I can't do that because
You
there's a
totally-
camera right here.
A couple episodes ago you said this, and I said the same thing then, and I mean it. You can still do that now.
It's true.
Just be like, I've got one, or I've got two.
It's true.
Anyway,
Well, so
keep
now
going.
that you
Keep-
completely called me
No.
out for trying to steer the ship a different direction,
You were
first.
right to. I was hoping that someone would contribute that was not just me, so I'm happy that you're taking it.
But we need to circle back because what
Yeah.
you were bringing up is
Yeah.
so important. I was joking before we started filming that if I had heard an episode on capacity where what you were bringing up was not mentioned and we had been in that season, I would have just turned it off. I would have been kind of mad and just turned it off. So we will talk about that. But I think, so often, especially when we have young kids in our home, but I don't know, I feel like maybe not just young kids, maybe older kids too. There is this tension between maybe abilities that we have, gifting that we have, and the actual capacity, which there's so many different categories for capacity. It's physical, emotional, relational, financial.
Social.
Yeah. So I think sometimes our ability and our capacity due to all the things going on in our lives, the kids we have in our home, the job we have, the finances we have, maybe our ability exceeds what our actual capacity for accomplishing those things are. And what do we do with that when maybe we're capable of doing X, Y, and Z, but we have all these other factors that if we were to do it just in our ability, we would not actually be able to love the people well that are in our home, or be a kind, peaceful presence, or be connected to the Father. So I think we need to just talk about that tension, because I think we all feel that a lot of the time. I know I feel that even with what we do, of feeling like there's a part of me that would love to be writing more and just studying more and teaching more, but then I have this real life and 4 kids at home.
You're talking about in regards to intentional, you wish you could be, totally. Yeah.
So I would like to be able to grow my abilities, but my capacity sometimes limits my ability to do that right now.
Yes.
So it's always a tension, I feel like.
Yeah, well, that's because I'm the one that's always ringing the bell with Elizabeth, because you are so gifted and you do have so much to offer. But to take the long view, because right now you have a 14-year-old, an 11-year-old, a 7-year-old, and a 5-year-old. And the greatest thing you'll ever do is what you're doing with those kids and pouring into them and what they're going to then bring to the world and what their kids might bring to the world. And so if we pull you away from them and load you up with so many things that you're capable of, we might pull you away from something that you're called to. And so I think when we talk about capability and capacity, we need to talk about calling too. Obviously if you have 4 kids, you are called to shape those kids and to bring them up in the way of Jesus. And that's going to be a huge chunk of your calling. And then God's going to give you the capability to do what he's called you to do. So anyway, I'm sure we'll be getting into a lot of this, but I'm always the one that say, let's don't ask too much of Elizabeth, even though she's very capable.
I think that's the interesting thing, and this is the tension, is that some people are more capable than they have capacity for, and some people have more capacity than they're capable for.
You are enjoying content brought to you by Intentional, a crowd-funded non-profit that desires to help families and marriages all around the world in the area of discipleship and spiritual formation. This offering is completely free, thanks to the generosity of our growing community of Legacy Builders. Legacy Builders is a group of people from all over the world that gives monthly to fuel this dream that we have in our hearts of seeing discipleship to Jesus in the family become a way of life. A monthly gift of $5, $10, or even $30 can continue to fuel this ministry forward. Our dream is to invite people like you to join and partner with us at a financial level and to see this work integrated into families. So as you listen to this podcast, would you prayerfully consider joining us? Would you allow the Spirit to lead you, even if it's just a few dollars a month? Thank you so much, and may the Spirit of Jesus give you wisdom, clarity, and joy as you pray about joining us. If you want to join today, go to intentionalparents.org and click on Give.
So you had we have a definition of capacity.
I
think is a good one to help us talk about.
Are you talking
wrap
about
our heads around that?
Are you talking about the one that has to do with giving out of abundance? The
Yes.
capacity, yes. So capacity has to do with giving out of abundance, and capability is ability without regard for capacity.
Right.
So let's talk about that, because I see with you, sweetheart, that you are very capable. Like actually we've talked to, like, it's problematic how capable you are because you can push yourself so hard. You can almost turn off feelings, emotions. I have a handful of friends like this too. And in one sense it's a superpower. It's also in another sense really detrimental to their own health, their own lots of different factors.
Well, because when I lean too much into that, then I lose capacity for the relationships in front of me.
Yes.
So there's a cost to that in this season of when I push hard like that. I can't do both at the same time very well.
Yes.
Not for very long anyway. Of have the margin to, so much of parenting is just responding. We have to have the margin to be able to respond in a calm, regulated way. And when I'm pushing, and then my youngest throws a temper tantrum, like there's no margin there for me to slow down enough to be able to be present to her and see what it is she actually needs. Yeah. And
you said earlier, Diane, slowing down to the pace of love, the pace of Jesus.
Right.
Like oftentimes, I know, especially when there's so many moving parts, it's not even just capacity for us right now. It's like, it's all the different variables. And now that there is officially 19 people in the Comer family.
Us too.
There's a lot of moving parts. You just think of our family. That's a lot of moving parts. But you also have John, Mark, and Tammy, Steve and Rebecca, Matthew and Simo. And then they all have kids, which that's new as of last year. So
that's right.
It's a really interesting
and their
dynamic.
Needs change and opportunity changes for us to be able to be building into the next generation. I don't want to be so busy doing all these other things for other parents and other grandparents that I'm not present to and continuing on those relationships with my grandkids, because I'm very aware that there's a kind of a special niche that a grandparent can play in their grandkids' lives in supporting what their parents are saying, but saying it in a completely different way, or just, giving them some encouragement along the lines that their parents are needing to correct. That takes time. 19 people take a lot of time.
A lot of time.
Yeah.
I'm thinking of also some of our worst moments come when we haven't honored our capacities.
Yes.
So when we say, no, I can do another thing, or no, I can do that and this and this and this, and we're not actually in tune to our own capacity, that's when I can say this personally, and I think that I'm not alone. The moments when I'm short, when I'm angry, when the worst parenting moments, the worst moments as a husband, it's always when it's all just too much and I haven't honored.
You haven't taken a breath.
Yeah. And I think there's, and again, capacity is another, there's that whole other underlying thing of, there's also hurry, John Mark talks obviously a bunch about that, but there's that piece in there too. Yeah. There's so many different things that play into our ability to have the right capacity to be present to Jesus, to be present to our kids, to be present to our spouse. And so I want to kind of talk about that from a biblical perspective. Phil, I see you have your hand in a verse. I see Elizabeth does too. Ladies first.
Gonna get to go first.
Why don't you go first? Because I think yours sets up this next part really well. And then Phil, I know you'll have I know that if this verse doesn't hit, you'll have 4 other verses.
3.
3. So, but yeah, why don't you share that? Because I think that was really helpful with setting the foundation of what we're trying to actually accomplish and what we're trying to move towards.
Yeah. Well, I think before I read it, as you were talking, I think
again, before I even get into it, let me just say something.
No, I have an addition to what you were saying.
I'm teasing.
I think what we're talking about, I'm just verbally processing here, requires a lot of self-awareness of how God has wired you, how he's gifted you versus how he hasn't. I think we almost need more of an awareness of what our weaknesses are or the areas that are just not our gifting, what's not ours to do. But 1 Peter 4, starting in verse 8, actually, when we talk about loving others, it says, above all, love each other deeply because love covers over a multitude of sins. Offer hospitality to one another without grumbling. How often do we get grumbly when we're working outside of our capacity? And we just need to be hospitable to our own family. And we're grumbling about it. And then this is the verse 10. Each of you should use whatever gifts you have received to serve others as faithful stewards of God's grace in various forms. I love that. And then further on in verse 11, if anyone serves, they should do so with the strength God provides, so that in all things God may be praised through Christ Jesus. To him be the glory and the power forever and ever. And just that idea that we are supposed to use the gifts God has given us, which implies we don't all have all of the gifts. Yeah. We have specific gifts given to God for us for him to be glorified, for us to use those, which first infers we have to know what those things are. And I think a lot of your younger years are figuring out, how has God wired me? What are my specific gifts?
And what are not your gifts?
Yeah. What are you never going to be good
even
at?
Comes first.
Yeah.
You realize, oh, this is not a gift of mine.
Because when we're operating out of the gifts he's given us, then we can lean into the strength he provides for us to actually be able to do those things. But then I love the end, because the whole point is so that he would be glorified. Not that we would be glorified, not that our kids would thank us, not that people would think we're amazing, but so that his kingdom would be furthered.
Let's bring that to like a practical level, right? Because I think all of us in this, one of the things we do is we study not only our spouses and each other, but all of us are in tune with, especially as we're on a team and we have all these different familial dynamics, but working dynamics. We're in tune to like, there's a certain things that we should never ask Diane to do. And then there's certain things that you should only do, and you should be the only person on the team to do it. Right. So it's also understanding like what is yours to give. And I would just love to bring a little practical, like it would be fun to just kind of highlight some of those things, like between us. Right. So like Diane's an incredible writer. She can write anything that we have written. Everything goes through Diane. We're always like, look at this, read this, make this better.
And it lights me up. I mean, to me, that doesn't feel like work. That feels like, I get to sit down and do this. So we work.
You do become abnormly giddy about it.
I do.
It's good. I mean,
study is the same thing.
You come alive. Like it's a part of you. It's like, that's yours. That's one of your things that we give. But when it comes to like a big, like a project management of a task, that's just
assign. Give me a task, not a project.
I don't think it's just like, we wouldn't do that, because that's just not necessary. That's on the work front, right? But that's just not where your mind or you sit.
Anything administrative. Yeah. Or, I'm tidy, but not organized.
Yeah.
So don't ask me to organize an event or.
But even you saying that, I think there's a lesson in that, like getting to know who you are, and then with Jesus helping him helping you accept who you are. Maybe is a different way to say it.
At the same time, being aware that in life, you can't just do all your favorite things all the time. We're called on to manage a project. Thanksgiving this last year was a big project for me to manage. Pushed me past my capacity, so I wasn't having very much fun. But it's just what you do in life sometimes. Now, next year, I'm not going to make a turkey. I've said that so many times. The turkey is just a mess on Thanksgiving. So anyway, the idea is you can't just say, well, I'm only going to do what I love to do, what fills my bucket, what lights me up. I mean, I love a nice clean house. That means I have to clean the bathrooms. I don't love to clean the bathrooms.
Sure.
So that's normal. So it's like when we talk about capacity, we aren't just saying that we have to always be in our sweet spot.
Yes. No. Well, and most of our lives don't have the luxury of that anyway. No. Like it's a very rare thing. And about Thanksgiving, Phil and I like the honey baked ham anyway. I mean, truly.
Well, we'll still do a turkey. We'll just buy one already cooked and smoked.
I won't cook.
She won't cook it. We had trouble getting it done or knowing what it was.
But like on another front for skills though, like the level of details that you naturally catch is insane to me. You remember more details without writing things down than anybody I've ever met. Still at your age and stage, you are still like, have you thought about and remembered these 5 things? And it's like, no, I forgot. And I've even written them down, And so I think we all have our different skill sets and our strengths and weaknesses. I was just at an event with John Mark, and I've mentioned this to you guys because it was so beautifully frustrating to me. We were sitting next to each other, and it was earlier in the morning and he looked so tired. And so I said, dude, you look real tired. And he's like, dude, you have no idea. I'm so tired. And he's like, I woke up this morning and wrote this teaching. And then like 2 seconds later, he says this and they're like, introducing John Mark Comer. And he's walking up on stage and he goes to teach, right? And he's teaching and it is probably, I mean, similar. He's an incredible communicator. Everybody that follows him already knows this, but I know John Mark from when he was, 20 years old. I've known him we've been, family brothers for so long. And so I've been able to watch this, gift, but he also just like stood up there and gave probably one of the most brilliant teachings. And he had about 30 minutes that he prepped for this thing. And it was just another reminder, like all of us have these different capacities, different gifts, different capabilities. And even though I'm in that world and I know what it takes to put together content that's helpful and hopefully relevant and filled with the Spirit, and he just does it so effortlessly that in no way was I actually threatened. He got off the stage and was like, dude, that was so incredibly encouraging, helpful, impressive, a blessing, and so that's just another example, right?
But here's a mom's insight. When he was 17, he started a Bible study at his high school.
Yeah.
And it was real small at first. And after 2 or 3 weeks, he quit because he said, I just don't have I don't have anything to say. So fast forward all these years later of studying and working and reading and memorizing and
of
just
course.
Sermon after sermon after sermon after sermon. And in half hour, 20 minutes,
you can put
it all kind of converges in his very smart brain and he's able to.
Yeah.
So part of that capacity has to do with age and what you've been doing with your life for all those years.
Yeah, I mean, you might
that's
look at him
very
and say, wow, what an amazing teacher. What they don't know is that he's been honing that craft for more than 20 years.
Yes.
And we remember at Solid Rock where he would go climb up on the roof of the building
And memorize
and for 45 minutes walk around completely memorizing a 50-minute teaching.
No, not 45 minutes, hours.
An hour
said
and
like
have the
3 to
entire
4
thing.
hours.
I mean, who would do that? I'm not going to do that.
Yeah.
And
Hard,
so then
man.
you get up and they go, wow, the guy preaches without notes. Yeah, because he just gave an hour of memorizing what he spent hours on putting together and digging into the scriptures. And before that, years before that, he taught the whole Gospel of Mark to a group of college students in a house, and it all builds. And I think that sometimes we look at somebody and we say, "Oh, wow, I want to go do that," And we tend to admire someone else's gift, instead of saying, "What's my gift?" And it's not only. I love the passage you read. It's not just spiritual gifts, though; it's in natural abilities as well.
Yes.
And they're given by God, and how God wires you and makes you, and we're responsible to use those. But Diane could just only write, and she'd be like eating ice cream all day and just close the door and be by myself for days on end. But she's the matriarch of a family of 19. So if she does that, then the first people that aren't going to get any attention from her are me, and then you guys, and then her kids, and then her grandkids they all need stuff from her too.
Absolutely.
So that's where calling comes in.
Yeah.
I think you can't just look at, I'm really gifted at this. Like I was saying about Elizabeth, she's really gifted, but we don't want to pull her too far into it because she has a calling with her children and all that. So I think that we need to remember this about.
I think maybe tell us a little bit about call. I think you're going to a place that I think is really good. Maybe just give us, a couple minutes on calling, because I think a lot of people listening are probably wondering, well, if I'm younger or whatever stage you're listening at, and you haven't really discovered some of your calling, I think sometimes people refer to calling as just ministry calling, but there's plenty of callings that aren't related to ministry in any sense, right? Many actually. So could you maybe just give us a few minutes on that? And I know I'm putting you on the spot, but I have no doubt that you'll have. We have a new offering for you. If you would like to receive daily or weekly text messages and encouragement around parenting, marriage, with prayers and scriptures, click the link in the show notes and we would love to send those to you. Can't wait to connect more with you.
Yeah, I mean, we could do a whole thing on calling because, for a while, our generation, we made a mistake by saying, we used to Diane and I met in a church that was during the Jesus movement. It was exploding. People were coming to Christ and getting baptized. And at one point, there were 1,000 young people, middle school through college, actually there in the middle school, high school, and college gatherings during the week. And there was all this passion and movement. And so we would do a thing called a missions conference, where we'd have missionaries like Luis Palau come in and share. And then at the end, we'd say, if you're willing to serve Jesus and go to the ends of the earth, come forward. Well, one time we had 200 people come forward. Most of them were college students. And then we said, okay, we're going to Tuesday night, come to the church. We're going to meet with you. And not all of them came, but a huge chunk of them came. And you know what we said? You need to go to Bible school and become a pastor or missionary. Whereas some of them weren't called to be pastors. What they were really saying was, I love Jesus and I want to serve him like these missionaries I'm listening to. But one guy in particular, I felt he's called, his dad wants him to take over the family business. And we all think that's really what he's supposed to do. So he went to Bible college, and God used all that and is still using it in his life. But you know what he ended up doing? Taking over his father's business. Yeah. So calling, there is a calling to vocational ministry. Like we both know in our soul.
Yes.
Even before we met, Diane felt God was calling her. It's another story. It's a beautiful story. She wanted the white picket fence, the perfect life, all of that. And God was telling her, then she married me, right? You're not going to get that. But actually, no, she knew God was calling her to something different.
You got a white picket fence because your kids dug all the
and painted
posts
it.
and
I've heard
primed
this story
it
many
and
times.
painted it. And it was not a small yard. It was a massive yard.
Yeah.
And power washed it because of all the mud.
You actually had more
you're
than,
welcome. You got a white picket
You actually
fence.
had more than one picket fence. You had one in Aptos, California, and you had one in Portland. Anyway,
maybe she did
but
get the
that's
picket.
another thing.
Another deal.
So I just think that some of about calling is what is God leading me into. So as soon as you're married, your spouse is part of your calling.
Yep.
Sure.
As soon as you have a child, raising that child is part of your calling. And but I think that we learn what our calling is as we are involved with the family of God. So you can take a spiritual gifts test. I took them, and I thought for years I had a particular gift, and I found out years later I didn't even have it right. I thought I had that gift because I was so black and white, I must have the gift of prophecy. No, I found out years later I have the gift of encouragement. But I figured out, you figure out what your calling and gifts are by just showing up in church, starting to serve, just see what needs to be done. Oh, you need help setting up chairs? I'll set up chairs. And then you just start hanging out with other more mature believers who have gone before you, and pretty much they help you figure out what your calling is as far as, what you might become. And then you figure out, hey, I have the gift of teaching, or I don't. I mean, there are many people that wanted the gift of worship leading, and they should not be leading worship. But they watch somebody who amazingly had that gift, and they go, I want to do that. Yeah. But that wasn't their calling. And so I think that's partly discovery. And then there's certain things that were just called to in Scripture. This is the will of God, that you abstain from sexual immorality. Okay, I know I'm called to that. Like, if God makes it clear, I want you to be sexually pure, you're called to that. Yeah. But we're talking about in life, like, how do you figure out, am I supposed to be a writer? Am I supposed to be, we could talk forever about this. I just think God can't wait to show you. He's eager to direct anyone who says, I'm yours, Lord, 100%. But it's when we say, I have this dream and I'm asking you to go bless it, that's when we get into trouble. Yeah. It's when we say, when we follow Jesus. If anyone wants to come after me, let him deny himself, take up his cross, and follow me. So when we follow him, he leads us into, what I like to call the old Stephen Curtis Chapman song, The Great Adventure. We start experiencing, this is the great adventure.
I can't believe you quoted Stephen.
Hey, he's a great guy. He's older now, but he's amazing.
I'm sure he's amazing. His music is questionable
he's a godly guy.
As far as, great lyrics, I'm sure. Musically challenging.
I'm just saying, it's the great adventure. Following Jesus.
I also have like this, anytime somebody says Stephen Curtis Chapman and says songs like this, like all of my prepubescent childhood comes to
This is the great adventure.
Please don't.
That's going to cost us $100,000 just to even sing his song on this. Elizabeth, you wanted to say something?
Well, I think that there's a lot of, still lingering questions for a lot of moms. I'm thinking of like the moms who especially have little kids. I think the message was preached pretty loud for a long time from the church as a whole of, if you're a mom, that is your calling. That should be enough. You should be content at home. And obviously pendulums can swing way too far the other way.
Yeah.
But I think there's a long season as a mom where your calling feels really fuzzy. Unless maybe you had kids a little bit later, or you've, one of those unique people that it's been so clear since very early on what your calling is. I think the majority of us, especially if we have kids at a somewhat younger age, it feels really fuzzy for a long time. Yeah. And I think, yes, we can be very confident that if we have kids in our home, that is one of our primary callings. But it doesn't mean that we're not called to other things or have other gifts that we can develop and grow that maybe we're going to use later, maybe we're going to use at the same time. But that's where I think community is so important, because like what you were saying, Dad, is that so often it's the body of believers that help you figure out what that is. Yes. And I think that's so true for moms who sometimes we figure it out a little bit later and it feels like we're late to the party, when I actually think it's the years of struggle and trying to figure it out that actually are really solidifying and helping you know yourself. But I think we just need other women, especially around us, saying, you are one of the most, like I'm thinking of my friend Nicole, one of the most empathetic people I've ever met, comes out of her story, comes out of wounding, and yet it is this beautiful gift that she offers people. Yeah. So whatever it is that she does, in addition to raising her 4 kids, I think it should involve something with sitting with people, because she's so good at that. Or, I have other friends who are incredibly, clearly have the gift of hospitality. Yeah. And that's maybe a little bit hard to express if you've got a bunch of little kids running around, but you can still express it. They need to be, she needs to be encouraged to express it. You know, I just think that's where we need each other. We need to not just be with each other, but we need to be willing to call out what we see in people.
Yes. Yes.
I remember so many times people telling me that maybe I was a teacher, and I did not believe it. I was like, no, I'm not. Like, I don't want to do that.
A school teacher or like a Bible teacher?
Like that I had the gift of teaching in some way. And I was the latest to the party. I feel like
you still are late to
can
that
only
party.
just now say, maybe.
I've been telling you this for years. So have your parents, so has your brother. Everybody's been telling me.
See? Sometimes you need people speaking into things that you can't see, especially when you feel buried in raising kids. Yeah. I also think that we've got to shed this idea that you have to know it young and be using it young, or you're not going to be usable later. I just think in most cases that's very much not true.
Okay, I want to echo that, because I very much started off as a wife and mom in the era of this is what the fulfilled woman is. Yeah. Her husband and her children. Well, obviously, after all these years, that is sinking sand. That's that Matthew 7. You can be building your identity really on how your marriage is going, how your kids are doing, 2 things that you don't have a whole lot of control over. Our identity has to be, and our fulfillment and satisfaction has to be in Jesus. So number 1, our kids are not going to satisfy us in that way. Although they can come back to bless us, they also can come back to hurt us, as many wonderful moms and wonderful dads have experienced. Their kids can wrap up all their hurts and just, somebody has to be at fault. Sure. So I feel like it's a mistake to think that this is, while I do believe it is probably the highest impact we will ever have an opportunity to have on the generations and on the kingdom to come. We can't think it's going to just make us happy, happy, happy all the time, because it is a laying down of our lives. But also, I quit college because I was going to be a career mom. I was going to just make home my career. But you only have, even with me spreading my kids out over a 12 years age differential, you still have a lot of years of living. So I feel like what I wish somebody had told me is that when I had my first baby, that now I'm beginning to develop skills and education and interest and knowledge for what I'm going to do later. And then you have all those years to be preparing, to be testing, to be trying things out, to be going back to school. When your kids, how many moms do I know who went back to school when their kids were in high school? What a great way to show your kids the importance of education. So these are preparatory years. I think that's why so many women excel in leadership as they get older. CEOs of companies, presidential candidates, women who just they've practiced and honed these skills in the early years with kids, and usually a job too, but especially you learn to be a leader in a home. And then they emerge all of a sudden as these really high capacity
This
gifted leaders.
Well, it's reminding me, you did say something, Phil, just a sec, and I share the scripture in a second, was, the idea that when you're in your 20s, and you're talking about this too, when you're young, oftentimes we feel like we need to figure that out when we're young. My favorite,
urgency.
You feel this urgency, we all do, especially in our culture now that we can see everyone's life and we're all like pseudo connected through technology. Ronald Rolheiser talks about this brilliantly. And I remember the first time I really read this and understood it, and he talks about the different stage theories of spirituality. But oftentimes in our 20s, and when we're young, high school, in our 20s especially, we have these grandiose dreams about ourselves. Like, we're called to this, we're called to that. I'm going to be doing these things. And I remember reading, and it was very sobering. He's like, a lot of those times, those dreams are not connected with reality because we don't fully know our own capacity or capability yet. And we are building these dreams off of thoughts and ideas that aren't rooted in who we actually are. And so why it's incredibly tricky is when you're in your 20s, you're dreaming these things that you actually do not have the ability to live out in your own life or your own skills. And then he talks about your 30s are highly disappointing because so much of your 30s are realizing that those things, this is true. This is a very wide reaching thing that many people, even right now in their 30s, are feeling like, why is it so hard? I feel like life is so challenging, and there's a death, a grief happening in that stage of life. And you're feeling the fact that those dreams that you once had are not going to ever happen. They won't. And so that's both sobering, but as you walk through the grief process with the Spirit, new things emerge and new things begin to come out, and like that maybe you didn't know were there. And I love that.
Let me give an example, because you called out specific gifts in our team. This incredible thing that we've seen that, really rising to you leading a nonprofit organization, and how much just comes so naturally to you leading this team. And we're not an easy team to lead.
You're easier than most, but
Verily.
There's some dynamics at play.
Sure, of what we believe and our opinions. And this gift has emerged of you being able to bring us into an understanding of each other, bring us back to what... we all get off on our tangents. Bring us back to what we're supposed to be looking at. What is okay, what isn't. I mean, you're just doing a fabulous job of that. You couldn't have known that in your 30s, that you had in your early 30s.
I was going to say, he's still in his 30s.
That's okay. No, but I was thinking about that in my own life, how off my dreams were. And it was through people. It was even you guys saying, you should think about joining Intentional with us. And my first thought was like, absolutely not. Are you crazy? No way. Like, I'm not going to do that.
Because the thing to do back then was to be an urban church planter.
Exactly. And that was the path that we were on, because that's based upon my own experiences, limited understanding of how the world worked and how I was wired within that world. I thought, of course, that makes sense. And realizing now, as I get to spend so much time with wonderful pastors, especially lead pastors who are dear friends, and I get to support now in a different way. I don't want their job, like not at all. Like the whole time I'm watching the stresses, the challenges, and I knew that. Like I was around it for so long, and Phil, you've shared in so much detail, and I've lived that with you when you were leading Solid Rock and this massive things happening, and the church is exploding, and what that does to a human. And I'm realizing, like, if I can skip that, I think I might actually want to do it. So, but I didn't know that. I didn't know I wanted that or needed that. So, anyway, yes, to prove the point, thank you for your kindness.
To highlight, I'm just thinking of all the people listening who are in the years that you're now a little bit on the other side of. That doesn't feel good.
No. he used words like grieving and lamenting.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was
really
it was
Yeah.
super. It's I mean honestly,
Yeah.
only until the last couple of years has it at all been like, okay, maybe there is light at the end
Yeah.
of some tunnel.
But
Yeah.
I think it's also interesting that because we all have to go through it.
Yeah.
That is usually the primary season that we are raising young kids at the same time. And there's so much obscurity. I feel like there's so many future episodes we need to do as we're talking about this. And it's in that wrestling that I don't know what my gifting is. I don't know what my calling is. I don't know what life's going to look like outside of this. I just know that I need to show up every day, or I need to go to work every day because I have to put food on the table. Like there's so much beauty in those years, even when it doesn't feel like there is. The book Brooke's talking about, I think we've talked about it a bunch.
1,000 times.
Sacred Fire by Ronald Rolheiser. We'll put it in the show notes. But we basically give it away to anybody who's like maybe 30s, mid-30s.
It's a very helpful
like,
tool to just
so
root you back in
helpful.
reality.
Well,
Like,
it just
this
puts
is what's
language to what you're experiencing.
Yeah, it's helpful.
But I think those years are really a gift. And you need people reminding you that they are a gift and that there is a future outside of them.
And be patient with yourself.
Yes.
You don't need to get it all figured. The American career trajectory is get it figured out before college.
Yeah.
And then hone your skills and then immediately start on your advancing.
don't even know who
And that
you
is
are.
Hardly
You don't even know who you
anybody actually,
Can live that
lives
out.
that
Yeah.
reality.
Yeah.
At 18, you don't really know.
It's so true because I'm even thinking about Duke's going to start high school next year.
Yeah.
We're figuring out where he's going. And I started feeling this pressure of, we really need to help him figure out what he wants to do so that he can take the right college classes so that started taking it on myself of we can't mess this up. We need to really this is really important. But reality is he could go to school for something that is not what he ends up doing at all.
That's many of our stories.
Yeah.
Many
Most of our stories. And that's actually okay because you're kind of learning. Maybe better is to say what lights Duke up.
Yeah.
What is what doesn't feel like work to him? I mean,
Playing
besides
guitar.
skateboarding.
Playing
maybe.
guitar would
and,
be what
and
he
then
would
just
say.
help him to follow some of those dreams as far as he
Yeah.
can follow them with a little bit of reality thrown in there.
Exactly.
Yeah, I just want somebody to pay me a lot of money just to play guitar.
Yeah.
It may not happen.
He's the kid
Yeah.
though. He's annoyingly responsible enough with
Yeah.
himself that he would practice enough to be good enough to actually do it. He's one of those kids that you already see like,
He's
you have he has the
self-motivated.
discipline factor
Yeah.
that shadows me. I'm like, not, meaning like he's like already like, I'll just be consistent and committed to this thing for this many years.
He literally said yesterday, he was talking about another friend. He's like, I think he has potential to be a good musician, but he just doesn't have the dedication to practice every day.
Yes.
It's like, buddy, you're going to run into this your whole life. You're going to care a lot more than a lot of people care.
Yeah.
You had a verse though, Phil, a little bit ago, and I
had a different
sense-
verse than the three that I haven't been able to share yet.
But go ahead.
But
Go ahead.
the one that I thought of as Diane was talking, which I'm really glad you did because you, being older, you have a perspective, is that everything doesn't need to happen right now.
Yeah.
That some of the dreams, people in your age and stage and even younger that are listening to this podcast, the dreams are from God, but the timing may not be now. And so I think we have to take an eternal perspective, all right? God is outside of time. We only have a limited number of years. It's like Psalm 90 says, 70, if due to strength, 80, 70, 80 years, and many people don't even get that. And so God is shaping us and molding us. So the question is, are we trying to, like you said, follow your own dreams, or are these really God's dreams? So, I mean, to me, it can be really simple. Proverbs 3, 5, and 6, trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways, acknowledge him, and he shall direct your path. So I think that's where the community comes in. That's why I need to be in church. That's why I need to be listening to those older than me and other peers and listen to what they're saying and evaluating it, because everything everybody says isn't right either. But some of it could be from the Lord.
Yeah.
And then God will sift all that through. But I'm thinking, as you were talking, I was thinking of our friends Emerson and Sarah Eggridge, which we're all friends with. And he was an amazing, he got his doctorate. He's an amazing Bible expositor. He taught verse by verse through the scriptures for years right across from a huge college campus in Michigan, and he was good at it. And back then you did everything. He's counseling, he's preaching. But he had this dream, like, Lord, I feel like you have something for me. And I'm not as good as an expositor as this guy, and I'm not as funny as this guy. What do you have for me? And he just felt like God kept saying, when you turn 50. And he was nowhere near 50 yet. He was like, when you
remember
turn
this story.
50.
Yeah, keep going.
And
That's
suddenly,
good.
just when he was approaching 50, this insight on marriage just like fell from heaven as he was studying the scripture. He's led to start this entire ministry called Love and Respect that's reached millions of people. Was doing massive marriage conferences, changed our marriage. But he knew something was coming, but God told him not yet, which made me think of Ecclesiastes.
Oh, yes.
There's an appointed time for everything, chapter 3 of Ecclesiastes. And there's a time for every event under heaven. Time to give birth, time to die, and then it goes on, and time to search, time to give up as lost, a time to be silent, a time to speak. So it just goes on. We need to remember there's a time for everything.
Yes.
And so it is true. In your 20s, you're young and you've got, passion and ideas, and I can do that, And I think by your 30s, one of the best things you learn is what you're not good at. That's as good as knowing what you are good at. Usually by your 40s, you've been hurt, you've been beat up. And if you've responded in humility, you have more compassion, you have more depth, you have more understanding of how to help others. And that doesn't necessarily just happen. It happens if you're walking with the Lord. If you're not, then you can get older and still be foolish,
Yes.
But I think that it's okay to dream. It's good to dream.
Yes.
Yeah, just every dream, as you sift through it, might not be from the Lord. And if it is, it might not be now. That's what I wanted to say.
One of the things of perspective is that I think that we should never lose sight of when we're talking about calling and what we may be doing with our life, further down the road, is that surprised me is that your story is mostly of suffering, or of failing, or of disappointment, or think life not working out all rosy. Those stories God wants to use. So that ends up being a part of your calling.
Yeah.
Whether it's whether your job is in the hospitality industry, or you're a salesperson, or you're a counselor, or teachers like us, or a writer, your story is going to fuel that, because what we've been healed of, we become really passionate about. And passion has a lot to do even with capacity.
Yes.
I have a lot more capacity to write about something that I'm really passionate about. Whereas I also edit like little blurbs and things like that. I'm slow. I complain inside. I'm not passionate about it. So some things we just do. There is duty that is an important part of life, but by being self-aware and understanding, like Brooke and I have separately done a lot of diving back to our, family of origin and seeing some course corrections that needed to be made. And then we get really passionate about these things because we know that had our parents understood them, how our life could have been in our early years different. And we also know that our parents wanted to understand them, but their circumstances
didn't
prevented them from
and
that.
honestly, that's what I keep seeing more and more is all of these folks in my stage have not holding the understanding that their parents, people in your stage of life, didn't have tools.
No.
And so they crucify them on this very unrealistic self-righteous altar when you realize you take a second, breathe in. It was not an easy road. They wanted to do better. They wanted to do better than they could. That's the truth of it. I think, getting back to the capacity thing, and Diane, that was really beautiful what you just said. Christine Kane, she's a firecracker. She's so fun. And you found this quote. Do you mind if I read it? Is that okay? So, Christine Kane, brought to you from Elizabeth. You get it. So she says this: so many of us are so busy trying to be amazing that we are not amazing God. And we are so busy curating a public profile that has no power. And we're spending no time cultivating a private life with Jesus that would build our interior world so that we would have power that comes from the Holy Ghost on the inside of us. Yeah. If we stopped trying to amaze each other and we started amazing God, then God could do amazing things in and through our lives. Here's the great news of the gospel. You don't have to be awesome. because God is awesome.
Yes.
Yeah. Well
So
said.
good. So
I
wise. So
love
much
that.
wisdom.
So
We
much
could do several
wisdom.
podcasts on that.
Yes.
One paragraph.
On that one paragraph. But, obviously this comes back to there is a certain level of times when we are outside of our capacity, which we talked about, where we are being pushed beyond our capacities. We've done an episode before on the idea of optimal deprivation, this idea that there's a certain level of deprivation your kids need, you need, we all need to actually grow. It's muscles under weight and tension, right? The muscle tears,
The breaking down that actually
builds up. And so
And
that's
the
built
biblical
in.
word for that is perseverance. I love that word.
Yes.
That means you've learned to push a little beyond what you thought your capacity was.
Yes.
Or your comfort zone.
Yes.
I remember us having a discussion once of me not just having all the insecurities of a teacher, wishing I actually said things the way
A public speaker is what you're talking
a public
about.
speaker.
Yeah.
Actually being able to speak more freely, and I was frustrated and kind of wanted to quit.
Yes.
In fact, I said at one point that I was going to take a 1-year sabbatical from teaching.
Yeah, I remember.
And you all looked at me like, oh, what?
We're going to have to
Yeah,
make some
right,
phone
Mom.
calls.
What I really just needed was a break, and I needed to go back and humble myself and say, okay, I have this to offer. It's never going to be as good as I want it to be, but it's not about me. It's about passing on to the next generation lessons in my, in my own way and manner. But what you said to me at the time was, it's okay if you to do things, and good for us to do things that make us uncomfortable.
Yes.
I thought, okay, this is a matter of me not being comfortable. I'm comfortable curled up in my blanket in my big chair by the window, my study books all around me, totally comfortable. But they would just stay in my journal if I wasn't willing to make myself uncomfortable, and knowing I'm never going to be as good as I want to be.
Sure.
And I think that's a really important part of capacity too. My particular personality, I could easily limit what I would do in life and just have everything just be safe and comfortable and done the way I like it.
Yes.
And God is always for me pushing me to allow myself to let go of some things that make me comfortable.
Well, I really appreciate that for two reasons. One, thank you. I didn't know that I even said that to you and that it was impactful. I think
Think about it a lot.
The Spirit. Well, I think the Spirit knows what we need, right?
Yeah.
And so I think that's cool how God does that. But I was going to say, I really appreciate you also being vulnerable and sharing that, because I think it's really helpful for people to hear. People that encounter you do not go, oh man, I really wish she could up her game in the whole communication department. I really wish she'd do better.
I really wish she was better.
They're not sitting there going, wow, this is real rough to get through, but I guess, she's here, so we'll just listen. That's not what it is. And so I think it's actually really important to what you just shared, I think is an important lesson for anybody listening, that even when you're in your calling and you're in your craft and you've spent years doing the thing that you love doing, it does not mean you're still not going to feel moments of insecurity, inferiority, or that it's still
Lack
not
of
going to be
capacity.
hard, that it might not still be hard. And I think that that's a truth under the truth that you were sharing, that that's the most real thing, that I don't think that goes away fully. I don't think you just one day go, I have it figured out. I have arrived. I'm completely able and capable. I think that tension is what we all hold. No matter what our calling is.
I also think that capacity is not fixed.
No.
We often think of it as this like, well, I have it or I don't. But I think back to in the seasons where what's happening in life is stretching you so far beyond what you know you have capacity for. And I think for most people, that's a lot of our life. We have a lot of those seasons. And so I think when I've been in those seasons and I've heard people talk about the capacity we choose, I'm going to choose to function within my capacity. I've had a hard time connecting with that because I feel like so much of my life has been having to grow the capacity,
you've
like
been forced
forced
out of
into
it.
operating way outside of my capacity. And I think God is so gracious in that when we're in those seasons, and sometimes they're not just when I say season, I don't mean like a couple of months. It was a really busy couple of months. Sometimes they're years.
Years,
Sometimes
decades.
it's, you feel like your whole life, I know I've said this out loud a lot. I feel like my whole life is beyond my capacity, you know? But I think God is so gracious when we can just say, God, I'm going to give you what I have. Like, and you're going to have to enable me. You're going to have to, that idea of abiding in the vine and bearing much fruit.
John 15:4.
It's this dance of, we connect ourselves to him. He's the one that grows. We bear fruit because we're connected to him. Those seasons are also so important. We can't always live forever and ever being stretched way far beyond what we're capable of and just being like, it's hard to be a loving person for a long period of time. But you brought up the word when we were talking, Mom, before we recorded, of just rhythm. Like there are sometimes rhythms in our lives that we don't have control over, that we have to just do the best that we can with the circumstances that are in front of us. And then there's other times where I think, especially in those seasons, like I think back to when Birdie was in therapy 5 days a week, I was constantly having to look at my life and say, is there anything that I actually can choose to take off my plate? Because if there's anything that there's a choice, I need to make a choice about
Or
it.
sometimes an expectation you have to let go of.
Yes.
This is kind of the
huge.
cultural expectation.
Yes.
I have to set it aside
Yes.
because of what I'm doing right now.
Yes. And with that, we kind of have to be ruthless. I kept finding myself forgetting that I had a child with disabilities, forgetting that I had chronic illness, forgetting all of these things because on the outside, we all look like everybody else. And then I would find myself, I'm functioning with all the same expectation on myself that I think I should have if this wasn't the scenario. So I was constantly having to relearn. I'm still having to learn it.
Like the main thing our therapist would say to us is, you have a child with special needs. You have chronic illness.
but-
You have a different life than your friends.
Yes.
Stop thinking it's the same. You know?
Yes.
But I mean, that like almost incessant having to like, for lack of a better term, just keep knocking us on the head of like, you have to remember, you're trying to compare yourself to someone else that has a whole different set of circumstance, which opens up their capacity. And how often are you scrolling through whatever app you like or whatever thing, and you are seeing somebody's life and you're not taking into account that maybe they don't have the same limitations on their life that you do. We just go, I don't have that.
You can't see all the things they don't do. Like I feel like
True.
People will even say to me, like, I don't know how you do all the things you do. I said, well, I should show you the list of things that I don't do anymore. That I wish I could do, that I wish I had capacity for, that are like a death to me, not to do them. But I can't do the things God's asking me to do and do all the other things I would kind of like to do, you know? I think that's where there's like a trust and a surrender and a wrestling the disappointment and it's such a journey. But I do think that it's so important to highlight that there are times when it's not what you would choose. And maybe you have a bunch of little kids at home and you both have to work full time and you feel stretched so far beyond your capacity. And there's not a whole lot you can do about it in this season, you know, or even to take the time to think about what could we do about it. Feels so
To get creative.
overwhelming, you know?
Or even you hear in church a call out for we need helpers. We need this. And I always wish that there would be a tagline. For some of you with the biggest hearts will think that you need to sign up for this and it's more than you can do right now. And we give you permission. I wish we would always say that.
Yes. We give you permission to honor your capacity. And then there's people who need to be stretched into God's asking them to do something and they just need to be willing to be uncomfortable, to be stretched, I mean, I think
your
that
capacity's grown so much through suffering. Like you have such a different level of capacity that I know, although in the moment you would be like, I choose this. We've had so many conversations. Now there's a gratitude for the capacity, the forced increase of capacity, which is not a desired thing.
And you know what I think is interesting is as I reflect back on it, I don't even know if I would say that my capacity for doing the things has grown. I think my capacity to not be a stressed out mess on the inside while I'm doing the things has grown. Like I think in some ways, I might even get less done now. I think I do get less done now. I mean, there's more on my plate, but I feel like I get less done in a day now. But I'm not nearly as flustered as I used to be.
You are
I'm not
nicer.
operating all the time with this like ramped up nervous system all the time. I can kind of roll with the punches a little bit better. Whereas before, I would just like go, 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 stuff it all, and then totally implode. You'd say one wrong thing, and the last
We
10
called it
years,
emotional landmines. And I
Yeah.
was like, I stepped on an emotional landmine and I didn't even know that there was one sitting right there.
And I couldn't even catch myself. It would just,
Yeah, it was
and
bad.
now what will I say to you?
I don't know.
Be like,
Lots of things.
in about a week, I'm going to hit the wall. So
Yeah.
what can we do to like
Yeah.
build in
I
some
need
time?
I need a break. At least a half a day or a full day between now and then. And honestly, that's
That's that self-awareness and being honest with
Yeah.
yourself. Some people wouldn't need a break.
No,
They
no,
could just
no.
keep going.
That's what
They
she
can let the
means, yeah.
messes
Yeah.
accumulate, knowing on Saturday I can get this all cleaned up.
Sure.
Totally.
And some people can't. But I also think that our capacity, sometimes we get limited. Our capacity gets limited. I've noticed that when I began to lose my hearing. And then when I went completely deaf and I use a cochlear, my capacity to be plugged in and listening, I know about, my phone has an app on it that tells me how long I've been listening in a day and in a week. And I kind of know the numbers where I'm beyond my physical capacity to be out and about and listening and absorbing.
Yeah.
It's and not only is that really important that I'm honest about it, because I've been deaf for so long that I almost forget that everybody isn't like this.
You're so funny. Yeah, I oftentimes will say, you're tired because you've been hearing so long,
That's
and
right.
and we have to. You'll be like, oh
Yeah,
yeah,
and I
that's
think,
right.
oh yeah, but it's so normalized in my
Sure.
life right now.
Sure.
But I also think it's one of the greatest gifts has been the way my capacity is smaller because of it, because it also then allows me freedom to do the things that now I realize I'm gifted for, I'm made for, that don't involve hearing. Reading and studying and thinking, constantly thinking things through. I'll be puttering around my house or folding clothes, unplugged, so I have a whole sense that doesn't distract me. And I'm thinking, that I'll run to my computer and I'll write it down. So your shrunken capacity, especially if it's physical, and even if it's emotional or social, or you're isolated for various reasons, or you're a caretaker, can be really great gifts as well, as long as we're not comparing ourselves to the norm.
Yeah.
What we think of as the norm.
Yeah.
Phil, I know you have a verse. Why don't you share a verse or two, and then I want to just end us with 4 questions to ask yourself about capacity and that, because I know that you've been listening a lot.
I've been
and
listening.
I know. I
Elizabeth talked about how, you wouldn't have asked for some of the things that have come into your life, but how God has given her the capacity and she's persevered. You use the word perseverance, and I thought of James 1 verse 12, blessed is the man or the woman who perseveres under trial.
Yeah.
And then there's a reward that comes. They will receive the crown of life. And that's also the chapter says, count it all joy when you encounter various trials, knowing that the testing of your faith produces endurance. So it's how we respond. We can respond in anger and, why did you do this to me, God? And go down a downward spiral.
And we
can
usually do at
we
some
do that. We all do that.
points.
Or we
Yeah.
can surrender and respond to the Lord, and then He builds endurance. And then the other thing that I was thinking was, this is where calling comes in. Whatever God is calling you to do, He gives you the grace and capacity to do. There's an old hymn called "He giveth more grace when the burdens grow greater." I could quote the whole thing, but His grace, His storehouse of grace is inexhaustible, and His power has no limit. And so I think when He does call us into something that's difficult, if we trust, then He will give us the grace to endure. Which one of the verses that I did want to read when we were preparing for this is Psalm 131. Which it's a Psalm of David, and it's subtitled "Childlike Trust in the Lord." O Lord, David says, my heart is not proud, or my eyes haughty, or lofty, lifted up. I don't think I'm hot stuff. Then he says, nor do I involve myself in great matters or in things too difficult for me. So in other words, there are things that are too big for me, and I'm not called to them right now. Surely I have composed and quieted my soul, and you and Elizabeth will get this, like a weaned child rests against his mother. My soul is like a weaned child within me. Now, it's a weaned child, not a nursing child.
Right.
So picture there, you can explain it as a mom. But
A nursing child is demanding.
Yeah.
As soon as the baby gets close to you, she wants more. A weaned child is satisfied and content. And
head on the mother's, I'm with my mom, who I'm safe here, I'm secure here. And I think David is talking about involving, he was a king. He was a leader of a nation and a warrior and a leader and all these incredible gifts. And he's saying, but I don't involve myself in matters too great for me. So I think that's where we have to know what we are being called into, and it's going to include some trials, because Jesus said, in this world you will have tribulation. And that's part of how God shapes us. And then he builds, like, look at Diane, all that she has to offer right now. He allowed her to lose her hearing. He could heal her right now if he wants to. She actually knows she doesn't want to be healed because he's using it, like the Apostle Paul. He had some kind of disease. I think it was an eye disease, because he said, I know you'd pluck out your own eyes and give them to me. He said 3 times I asked the Lord to take this away, and he said, no, my power is going to be perfected in your weakness. My grace is sufficient for you. So I think there are times God lets us hurt, he lets us suffer, but everything's going to be perfect one day when we're with him. We're in a fallen world, and he didn't create the world fallen. And it's our sin that's messed it up. But there's a day coming when there will be no more trials and heartaches. But in the meantime, we suffer, and then we can bring a picture to the world of, yes, I'm suffering just like you're suffering, but God is meeting me in the midst of my suffering. And that's where people can, they have the same hurts whether they know Jesus or not that we do who follow Jesus, but sometimes we can put our roots deep down in him, and he will give us all we need. And then people will say, well, how are you coping with this, Elizabeth? Like, how can you even do this? And you could say, well, because, there's that verse we quote all the time, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me, from Philippians. Paul said that. But what does that mean? Like, okay, so I can do anything? Like, there's a 2,000-pound rock, I'm going to go bench press it. No, because anything God's called me to do, I can do through Christ who gives me strength. So I think we have to remember when we talk about capacity, calling, capability, let's leave God in the middle of it. Yeah.
With these 4 questions to ask yourself as we close, we'll just give them real quick. The first is, am I striving? Ask yourself, are you striving? Are you living inside your capacity, or are you striving for something that is not yours to do? You don't have the capability to do.
And
are you striving, or are you like the weaned child? Right?
Exactly. It's a good visual.
Not anxious and demanding and pushy and falling apart all the time, or tense inside, feeling your shoulders are tense and your body is tense. Those are signals to us that we're striving.
And it's hard to be around folks that are striving.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm hard to be around if I'm striving. At least this is what my wife says.
And I think for a lot of people, doing and accomplishing was synonymous with being loved and being encouraged. And so if that's maybe the family of origin that you came from, maybe the culture of your family and your home,
sometimes the school system even that you were raised in.
Well, I feel like it's also just the culture that we live in, even if maybe that's not how your family was, that's how you get noticed, that's how you so I think that question is so important, just to sit compassionately with the Father with. Just, God, would you show me if this pressure I feel is not because you're calling me to do something, but it's because I want to be loved. I want to be seen as good. I want to be viewed as successful, as doing it right. Like, we all have different reasons for why we might do that. But I think there's a lot of freedom if you can be compassionate with yourself and hear God's true voice and just ask the Father, what are the things that I'm doing in my life that the driver is striving, not actually calling or being filled with the Spirit and responding to what you're asking me to do.
Yeah. Great response. Second, am I living in fear? There's that Andy Kolber quote, may your choices reflect your hopes, not your fears. Yeah. That's a big one. So many people live in fear. And so are you making choices? Are you living in fear? Thirdly,
so give me an example of that.
I just skipped. I was almost
Okay.
to go 3.
So sorry.
No, you're good. Am I living in fear? I mean, how often would you have?
Oh, go ahead.
See, I think you can say it if you want. You seem like you
One
want
is the fear of what others might think of us.
Well, I was gonna say
Yes, I think,
Fear
yeah.
of disappointing people, fear of what other people will think, fear that it's going to be a missed opportunity.
How about fear of obscurity? I think
Yeah.
in this
yes.
social media world, we all feel like we need to be stars or something.
Yeah.
Whereas I think John the Baptist was very happy in obscurity.
Sure.
As soon as he became a
Absolutely.
star.
I'm
bad things
fearful
happen.
that what if God skips you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
What if this moment that
Yeah.
you're in is as good as it
Oh,
gets?
yeah.
I think those are fears that I would imagine many carry.
I just read, today's the 29th.
Proverbs
Proverbs
29.
29, verse 25. The fear of man brings a snare, a trap.
Yeah.
But he who trusts in the Lord will be exalted. So it always gets back to trust.
It's
So
It
if
does.
I'm fearing what somebody's going to think of me or what I'm in a trap, you know,
Yeah.
but if
Yes.
I'm just going to trust in the Lord,
trust in the Lord.
he will exalt me.
So the third one, am I accepting my limitations and my family's capacity and limitations? That's a big one. Are you pushing your family? Are you pushing yourself beyond your capacity? You have more capability than you do capacity, and
Which
you're
you
seeing.
notice in like lots of high drama starts to happen like
Yeah.
that. And
Well, your kids start to
arguments,
entangle.
and everybody kind of feels it.
Tension.
Like I feel like it's so important that both the dad and the mom are walking in those doors to be a peaceable presence so that they can help their children regulate their own stress that they're coming from school or friendships, middle school girls. We come in as a peaceful presence, abiding in Christ, right within our capacity, doing as God is asking us to do. We can really make a difference in our home.
And the last one, is it obedience? Is there a part of your story and your capacity right now that it's for your obedience? It's your job to obey, to be present, to just say, hey, I can see that there's this thing in the future. Or is the obedience, God, I'm going to choose to trust instead of choose to strive. And
Yep.
so these are questions to ask yourself and to just sit with and to process where are you at with all of that. And then to really make a lot of this a prayer into your future. And so great conversation today, guys. Thank you for pouring into this. Thanks for bringing all the different thoughts and pieces of wisdom. This was a fun one. So thank you all for listening.